Welcome to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, January 19th of 2026. We are about to speak with the author Kazu Haga, a nonviolence student and trainer and recent author of the book Fierce Vulnerability, which has really generated a lot of attention and attraction. But first, we had our roving reporter Nyanko Nyasu, our roving cephalopod down at Martin Luther King Day festivities downtown, the parade, and then later the gathering in front of City Hall. And we have a few clips for you from our local and fellow Santa Cruzans speaking about Martin Luther King Jr.
What his dream meant is that I had to hold the dream, I had to be resilient, and I had to keep walking in that dream. And one thing that life has taught me is that you can never give up. You have to continue doing this work, thinking these dreams and moving through it. And because, yes, I'm reading Roman history right now, and it's just amazing to see how ruthless and hard life can be. But we always will persevere as humans, and so let's do it.
Holding accountable of his dream. You know, it's bigger than marching. It's about being out there, supporting your community, fighting for the same rights that men fought for, housing, economics, and being treated and having dignity with our culture and stuff. And just doing it every day, because we can't just celebrate Martin Luther King one day. We got to celebrate his work every day. Like, you know, a good example is like Tyree. You know, that man celebrated Martin Luther King's philosophy all the time, always quoting his quotes and stuff and just doing the work. So I feel like it's important for me as an artist to be out there. I've been supporting this holiday for over 20 years. I'll be out with Curtis Relaford out there doing the work. And it's important for us as people of color, anybody to support, especially because Santa Cruz only has 2% of us. In this day, especially what's going on with Donald Trump and all these politics, we really gonna have to be on the front line. We can't just talk about it. We got to do the work. And it's not just being on social media, it's being on the front lines and making choices with our votes. It's getting these politicians out because they ain't doing a good job right now. I just want to read something real quick from Martin Luther King real quick. It's just very important because you're saying something that's really important here. So here we go. I'm just going to read a little bit. If we are wrong, we are not wrong in what we're doing. If we are wrong, the Supreme Court of this nation is wrong. If we are wrong, then the Constitution in the United States is wrong. If we are wrong, justice is a lie. Yes, love has no meaning. And we're determined here to work and fight until justice runs down like a water of a righteousness stream. I want to say to you that in all of our actions, we must stick together. Unity is in great need in the hour. If we are united, we can get many of the things that we're not only desired, which we justly deserve. Don't let anybody frighten you.
I came out today. I was excited to see all the people that came out. But, I asked them to make a commitment to themselves and to each other, right? I'm in this to the end because we already know what the administration's doing. We don't got to spend so much time there. What we got to do is make sure we don't go back there to 1960. And if people think that, that's not going to happen, really? I never thought 45 was going to be 47. I woke up this morning still. I'm telling you, it took me a long time to adjust to that. I said, see, y'all messing around up in here. You got to vote. If you don't vote, this is what happens.
That was audio clips and interviews from Martin Luther King Jr. Day with Jinx DeRussa, also known as Lady Jazz, who is host of the Heritage Gospel Uplift Show here on KSQD on Sundays at 11 a.m. Isaac Collins, young Black activist in town. Also Elaine Johnson, who is the head of the NAACP and many other movements and organizations in our community. Isaac was also referring to Tyree Ritchie, who I used to co-host a show with called Unheard Voices here on KSQD. So shout out to Tyree if you happen to be listening. Tyree actually self-immolated on the MLK mural in front of City Hall, was it Martin Luther King Day last year? Or was it, I think it was because it was the day of maybe the inauguration as well. So bittersweet feelings and emotions, hearing all these folks talk. And I think this is such an appropriate introduction to our guest, Kazu Haga, once again a nonviolent student and trainer and recent author of the book Fierce Vulnerability on what I'm calling deep nonviolence, holding compassion for the enemy, and what does resistance, or what does or should a movement for social and racial justice look like now? Welcome, Kazu.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be
Yeah.
here.
Thank you so much for coming on. And I don't know what else you did today. Did you do any other MLK things today?
I've been pretty busy all weekend. King weekend is always a busy weekend for me, but this morning I was really honored to start my day with spending a little bit of time with the only Arabic-speaking Buddhist Sangha based in Palestine for Palestinian people, and speaking to them about the relationship between Dr. Martin Luther King's message and the teachings of the historical Buddha. So it's really great to be able to support a community like that on a day like today.
Wow. Okay. I think we'd all like to hear more about that. But let me first introduce Kazu. Kazu Haga is a trainer and practitioner of nonviolence and restorative justice, a core member of the Fierce Vulnerability Network, a founding core member of the Ahimsa Collective, a jam facilitator and author of Healing Resistance, a radically different response to harm, and Fierce Vulnerability, Healing from Trauma Emerging Through Collapse, his most recent book. His work weaves together spiritual practice, trauma healing, and nonviolent action to advance social change and move towards collective liberation. He has over 25 years of experience in nonviolence and social change work. He is a resident of the Canticle Farm community on Liz John Olone land in Oakland, California, where he lives with his family. You can find out more about his work at www.kazuhaga.com, and we will include that link in the show notes on the podcast. Kazu was introduced to the work of social change and nonviolence in 1998, when at the age of 17, he participated in the Interfaith Pilgrimage of the Middle Passage, a 6-month walking journey from Massachusetts to New Orleans to retrace the slave trade. He then spent a year studying nonviolence and Buddhism while living in monasteries throughout South Asia, and returned to the U.S. at age 19 to begin a lifelong path in social justice work. He spent 10 years working in social justice philanthropy while directly being involved in and playing leading roles in many movements. He became an active nonviolence trainer in the global justice movement of the late 1990s and has since led hundreds of workshops worldwide. And Kazu was recently here in Santa Cruz at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, followed by the filmmakers Maurizio and Zayo Bonazzo and the film If an Owl Calls Your Name. They weren't at the same event, that there was just one right after the other. And If an Owl Calls Your Name is about trauma and healing trauma. And so I found those two events very rich in terms of their the themes that were overlapping in what Kazu talks about, and what this film, If an Owl Calls Your Name, is about, and our community response to both, which was tremendous. So I think I've heard that groups in our community are setting time aside just to listen to the show, Kazu. And so you are very welcome in our community, Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay area, and the Central Coast. And you just said something that was really interesting to me, and now I want to hear about it, which is speaking to a Buddhist group in Gaza about nonviolence. Is that right? And the roots of nonviolence? And this is so appropriate, I think, for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Tell us about what that was like.
Yeah, well, it's a Buddhist Sangha based in the West Bank, not in the Gaza.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's a group of Palestinian people who, many of them were part of Buddhist communities before October 7th, but after October 7th really realized that they needed their own space. And so some of the leaders in the West Bank pulled together a community of Arabic speakers, Palestinian people throughout the West Bank, as well as Palestinian people in the diaspora. And they've been meeting regularly to meditate together and to study Buddhist scriptures. And I had the honor of being connected with them at some point last year, and have spoken with their group a couple of times. And because today was Martin Luther King Day, the topic of our discussion was the relationship between the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King and his commitment to nonviolence, and its really rich connection with the teachings of the historical Buddha and Buddhist teachings. And so it was a really, really beautiful, sweet time. And like I said, I can't think of a better way to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King than to support Palestinian communities right now. So
yeah, and so you say they needed their own space. What was that about?
I think especially right after October 7th, they were meeting and meditating and listening to Dharma talks together with Israeli Jewish people. And I think it was just really hard, right, to give each group the proper space that they needed to grieve in their own way. And, of course, oftentimes a lot of white supremacist attitudes, colonial attitudes, patriarchal attitudes, all of these things that we all hold because we're human, they can creep into Sangha spaces, to Buddhist communities, and all spiritual communities, all even social justice groups. And so I think there was a lot that was being said in those spaces where, the folks of Palestinian descent felt like they couldn't fully be themselves and couldn't fully be seen and heard. And so I think it's really, really important for them to have their own space.
Yeah. And so the Buddhist, I guess, lineage in nonviolence, does that, I'm feeling like Gandhi was Hindu, correct? And so I know that Martin Luther King Jr. studied Gandhi's work and Ahimsa, or do no harm, the principle of do no harm. But where does Buddhism come into this, or do I have something wrong here?
Well, Martin Luther King credited Gandhi for taking what he called the love ethics of Jesus. And he said that Gandhi was the first person that took the love ethics of Jesus and transformed it from something that can change the hearts and minds of one individual at a time, and making it into something that can create systemic change, social change at scale. But ultimately, nonviolence is a worldview, a set of principles that have existed since our first human ancestor decided to fight injustice and decided to fight against violence, right? So it is an ancient teaching that's largely rooted in a lot of old Buddhist teachings. It also has a lot of roots in the religion Jainism, which is actually even older than Buddhism. And, you can make the argument that Jesus was a fierce advocate of nonviolence as well.
Yeah. It's interesting when we say we're using nonviolence to fight injustice, right? And and that's sort of like the conundrum and the problem that you address, I think, in your book, Fierce Vulnerability. And I want to get more to that because to me, I define it as deep nonviolence, like beyond just we are nonviolent, meaning we are not physically being violent. What does it mean to be mentally nonviolent, in a movement? And this is something you discuss. So I'd like to get to that. But there's something I think that's more immediate for everyone right now. And that's what's happening in Minnesota. And it, and there are, scattered also incidents of extreme ICE brutality in Portland and LA, where people have also been brutalized. Things have been happening all over the country, but in Minnesota right now, there's this sort of like conflagration of these untrained ICE agents / Gestapo, going door to door now and just completely violating our due process laws and our rights, our constitutional rights, Fourth Amendment rights, all kinds of rights, and then the killing of Renee Nicole Good. And so what you talk about in your book is healing from trauma. And how that makes us better, I think, activists. I think that's what you would say, and you get to tell me if I'm wrong. And so, but that's a process, right? Like you went through your own process over several years that you talk about. You talked about
I'm still going through it.
Right, exactly. So the question I think a lot of people have is, right now, the bleep, which we can't say because of the FCC, is hitting the fan, right? And people want to act. People are acting in Minnesota. Like, how long do we wait to act? How healed do we need to be, for example? Or do you support people going out and sort of doing their best? Like, what would you have to say about that, I guess?
Yeah, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think the shortest answer is no, we do not wait. There is no way on earth that we should wait for anything else to happen before we act, right? Dr. Martin Luther King said that it's always the right time to do the right thing. And so I think it's really important as communities are being targeted, as people are literally getting shot and killed by federal agents, that we need to be in the streets. We need to be doing everything we can to protect our communities. And, part of what I'm advocating for in the book Fierce Vulnerability and the trainings that I've been doing is that I think injustice and state violence, those things are not political things. To me, those things are manifestations of a collective trauma. And so as we mobilize, as we try to stop injustice, is there a way that we can do it in a way that reminds us that we are actually trying to bring more healing to the world? Right? We are responding to violence. We are responding to fracture. We are responding to disconnect and a disregard for human dignity. And so the response to that has to be grounded. The response to that has to be an honoring and a doubling down on the dignity of all people. And so I think we need to respond immediately. I'm in no way suggesting that we wait until all of our traumas are healed to hit the streets, because healed is not a thing that you can become. It is a lifelong journey of healing. We will always be imperfect. We will always be broken. And of course, the more healed we are, the more grounded we can be, the more we can stay connected to our deepest held values, even when we're being pepper sprayed or arrested by the police. That matters. But I think there's also ways that even in our brokenness, we can respond to tragedy, we can respond to violence in a way that gives us the best likelihood that we're bringing more healing energy to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of video clips of protesters in, there was the protester in LA who lost an eye, was dragged, into an ICE facility, I suppose, and that was horrifying to watch. And then I've seen people taunting, and insulting people who work with ICE, and I'm going to say this with a lot of caveats here, because there's what happened to Renee Nicole Good, there's no justification for, no matter what anyone said to the ICE officer, right? But I know I've heard that her partner was just beside herself with, thinking, did I say the wrong thing? Which, it's not a burden that she should have to bear, right?
No. But
the question is, I just wonder, and I've thought about this, like mused out loud on social media, like, there's the shaming that goes on, right, of ICE officers, and how much are you getting paid to, betray your soul and all this kind of thing, which a lot of us actually think. We think these thoughts. And so we're relieved when someone says them out loud. But at the same time, is that missing? You talk about in your book, there's one hand that's saying, no, stop. And the other hand is saying, this is what I think how you define nonviolence, real deeper nonviolence of the soul, of the mind. The other hand is offering something else. So I wonder what you think about those two. Like, I don't want to criticize anyone for responding in any way to ICE at this moment, right? Or to any of these tactics or things that are happening. But what would you say about how could you respond, to this kind of brutality and like machismo going on?
Yeah, so I want to reiterate something that you said. A commitment to nonviolence, to me, is never about criticizing people who choose to use even physical forms of violence as a way to advocate for their dignity, as a way to try to protect themselves and keep themselves safe and protect the lives of those that they love. But I do think that, and this is something I've always said, violence can be highly effective in keeping you alive. But one thing that violence can never do is that it can never heal relationships. It can never strengthen relationships. And part of the work of nonviolence is not just about fixing issues. Fixing issues is, passing legislation and getting certain politicians out of office. All of those things are critical and necessary. But nonviolence is about figuring out ways to respond to crisis in a way that fixes the issue, but also repairs the relationship long term. And so even as we're responding to state violence, even as we're responding to injustice, we're doing it in a way that is able to harness the power to stop injustice while also cultivating the love that is necessary to heal it. Right? Dr. Martin Luther King was very explicit. He was calling, towards the end of his life, was calling for a movement that was, quote, as disruptive and as dislocative as a riot. Right? Like, people think nonviolence and they think it's about being passive. They think it is about being weak. Nonviolent tactics can be as disruptive and as dislocative as a riot. But we're also understanding that you cannot shame someone into transformation, right? Like Dr. King did say that there's a role in nonviolent resistance for helping to awaken the sense of moral shame in the opponent. And so there's a way in which we can use our messaging, use our actions to offer an opportunity for ICE officers or whoever it is that is committing injustice to pause and to reflect on what they are doing and to see if we can awaken their own sense of moral shame, because people who are engaged in some of the actions that ICE is engaged in right now, like that should bring up a sense of shame, right? But creating space for people to have some introspection and to really assess, am I living the kind of life that I want to be living? Am I fulfilling my responsibility to beloved community? That is different than pointing our fingers and shaming somebody, right? And so I think there's a way to harness our power to try to stop the injustice without dehumanizing the people. Nonviolence is always clear that people are not the enemy, that injustice is the enemy. And in fact, part of the reason why we are in the mess that we are in is because we continue to live in a worldview that says, if I beat those people over there, then my side will receive justice, right? It's that delusion of separation that nonviolence is trying to reconcile.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Although I want to say one thing: I have been shamed into change. I have been. People have pointed out when I was a journalist doing an article once, I did something. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm certainly not going to talk about it on air. I mean, maybe I could in like one of those jam circles that you talk about. But I did something that I think I didn't realize I was crossing a boundary, ethical boundary. I didn't realize it because I was hot on the pursuit of a story, right? And it was this sort of very, dramatic thing that I was pursuing. And the mother of this younger kid, like a teenager, called me and said, because I had talked to this teenager and it was inappropriate to talk to the teenager, in hindsight. And she said, how could you have done that? Like, this is a kid, And I thought, oh my gosh. And it just hit me for like a whole day. Like I couldn't really function because I was like, I messed up. Now, so there's that too, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a beautiful example, right? I mean, I don't know the details of what happened, but what I heard you say is this person asked you, how could you do that?
Right.
Which is very different than saying, you are a terrible person, you don't belong here, you do not deserve to be a part of the human species.
Right.
Right? How could you do this? I think is a great question to ask for people who cause harm, to try to ask themselves, like, what am I doing? How am I impacting people? And I think if we could actually create space for ICE agents to actually pause, like for whatever reason, the dynamics between you and this mother created a situation where you were able to have some introspection for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes the messaging that we do is so shaming that it actually makes people defensive and makes them less capable of asking themselves, what am I doing? And so I think nonviolence at its best uses our bodies, uses people power to stop the harm and to stop the injustice while creating some seed of doubt, some seed of introspection in the person that is causing the harm to ask themselves, is this the kind of life I want to be leading? And that seed might not blossom for 10 years, but at least to try to plant the seed that might awaken their own sense of shame as opposed to us saying that you are a shameful person.
Right. Well, 10 years, we need some fertilizer, Okay, so as we're talking about this, the two examples, Palestinians in the West Bank that you've been speaking with, who are Buddhist, people in Minnesota, people in any community. We just had an ICE arrest here in our community in Watsonville. Have you had any examples, or what are people thinking about? Are you speaking to people in Minnesota, or has it come into your imagination what's a sort of action, or have you seen an action that would be like a nonviolent action?
Well, nonviolence is a really broad spectrum. So one of the projects that I've been participating in for a while, that I haven't been able to as much in the new year yet, is a national program organized by the National Day Laborers Organizing Network called the Adopt a Corner, where many of us are signing up and showing up on corners where day laborers are looking for work and just patrolling, that we have a constant presence and there are systems set up so that if there are ICE sightings, people can kind of swarm that place and do whatever we can to protect those people that are vulnerable. And so I think that is a nonviolent action that people are doing every single day to show day laborers that we care, that people are looking after them. And if ICE does come, I think the commitment of those of us who are committed to nonviolence is to actually, to the extent possible, everyone has different limitations because of a variety of factors, but to try to actually put our bodies on the line, right? To physically protect people from getting kidnapped, from getting deported. And I think those are nonviolent actions. And I think some of what can make that an action that might lead to actual healing is, as we put our bodies on the line, perhaps instead of calling ICE officers out of their name, staying grounded enough to actually ask that question with like genuine curiosity. Like, is this what you want to be doing? Can you see that you are destroying families and destroying communities? How does that make you feel? I remember years ago during a Black Lives Matter action, one of the most inspiring things I've seen was a people who were on the front lines all face to face with a row of riot police. And they were just standing there silently holding mirrors and kind of asking the police officers, like, can you even see your own humanity? Like, this is who you've become. Are you okay with this? And I think it's those kinds of actions. Again, people aren't gonna transform overnight and take off their police helmets and join the protests. Most likely, the stories like that have happened.
Yeah, we did have police kneeling. We had our police chief kneeling here, and other police kneeling across the country. We saw that, and what was interesting is that there was so much cynicism about that. Like,
yeah.
I saw it and I thought, whoa, that's pretty cool. And then people were like, no, like that's just, they were so, it's like, performative and not real. And then also I was just reading, the New York Times came out with a Sunday magazine, or the New York Times magazine that comes out on Sundays, just did a whole profile on Marjorie Taylor Greene and how she changed, Yeah. And I thought, okay, people are so cynical about Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I like, that was like, I'm going to sit down with this cup of tea and read this whole thing, and I did. And I thought, I think she's being sincere. She's certainly not like a progressive or anything. She's still got a lot of very odd opinions and harmful opinions, and she's done and said a lot of harmful things and spread disinformation, but there must be something about holding out that people have the capacity to change, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think it's also important to acknowledge, one of the gifts that nonviolence has given me, and it's also a gift that Buddhist Dharma has given me, is the reminder of the non-dual nature of truth and the non-dual nature of reality, that we can hold perspectives that are 100% in conflict with each other, and both can be 100% true. So, when I see police officers taking a knee in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, there's a part of that story that is actually beautiful. And there's also a part of that story that most times it doesn't actually lead to any substantive change. And I think it's because we have a tendency to freeze people in that moment and try to decide, is this a good thing or a bad thing just based on the one moment alone, as opposed to looking at this moment as an opportunity, right? Like, okay, police officers are kneeling in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Great. That is an opportunity for movement leaders to actually sit down with those officers and have a conversation about, what do you actually mean by this? Do you actually support our movement? And if so, what are concrete steps that you can take in that direction, as opposed to just saying, oh, they're being performative, period, or this is a wonderful thing, period.
Yeah. We're talking to Kazu Haga on Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills about his book, Fierce Vulnerability. Kazu is a Buddhist nonviolent activist and does a tremendous amount of work in many areas. We will be right back after this break.
Here comes the dawn.
That was the singing resistance on the streets of Minneapolis, marching through the streets and going to specific places where people, either immigrants, possibly residents, possibly citizens, have been abducted off the streets by ICE. And I highly recommend you go to their Instagram at Singing Resistance ETC, as in etc. Singing Resistance ETC. And I get chills every time I hear them singing. There's like a mass of them walking down the street singing to people who are still in their homes, frightened. Maybe their family member was just abducted and they don't know where they are and they're not allowed to talk to attorneys and all this kind of thing that we're hearing about. Kazu, well, do you want to comment on? I mean, that seemed to me like, wow, there's something in the monks walking across the country right now for peace. When I see that, my nervous system regulates. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a Buddhist meditation teacher that talks about how we need to become and we need to model the regulated collective nervous system that our country needs to heal. And I think there is something about, even in the midst of chaos, even in the midst of crisis, even in the midst of collapse, reminding people that beauty is here, beauty is possible, that it's still possible for us to be grounded. It's still possible for us to lead with love. Like, these are powerful things. Just the act of singing or just the act of sitting in silence together can be revolutionary in the right context with the right power analysis and the right vision, right? So I love the work that those people are doing.
Yeah, it's amazing. If you want to call in and talk to Kazu Haga, if you have a question or a brief comment, feel free to call in at 831-900-5773, 831-900-5773. We only have one person available right now to answer the phone, maybe two, actually. So, and you might have to wait just a little bit if we're in the middle of a discussion. You can also email us at onair@ksqd.org with a question or a comment. Kazu, I want to talk about another part of your book, which really resonated with me because I come from my own spiritual psychology background of 30 years working with colleagues across the world, teaching a thought-based psychology with, a spiritual, foundation in the sense of we're all connected to insight and wisdom and, core peace, for example. So kind of similar to all the truths, that the ancient truths that the different religions talk about, I think, including Buddhism. And I have gotten so frustrated with being in some communities that are spiritual communities and hearing nothing about what is happening in the world.
Yeah.
And then also, going into activist communities and hearing very little about, or close to nothing about, how we can be spiritually grounded at this time. And so I'm gonna read a quote from your book. Throughout my life, this is from page 50, conversations about nonviolence have been a real struggle in frontline activist spaces engaging in resistance work. More than once, I've been booed out of rooms for suggesting we hold empathy for our, quote, enemy. At the same time, when I find myself in communities where conversations about healing, reconciliation, loving our enemies, and all that beautiful jazz feel like second nature, I come up against a wall when I start talking about resistance, building power, and engaging in direct action. People sometimes assume this is contrary to loving all people and working toward healing, that when we engage in resistance work, we create conflict rather than lifting existing conflict into the open. And then you do kind of offer a solution. We are in a crisis. We cannot be afraid to harness power. And we must harness an incredible amount of power rather quickly. Anyway, that's one of the reasons I was so excited to interview you because I have a similar experience to yours. And do you want to talk about, are you seeing more of like a Venn diagram crossover between these communities? I mean, I feel like I've been barking up a wall with my spiritual community, my first and probably most important spiritual community.
Yeah, well, so as you mentioned at the beginning of this hour here, that I started my work in kind of social change work and nonviolence work in the anti-globalization movement of the late 1990s. We were organizing mass demonstrations against the World Trade Organization and the World Bank and International Monetary Fund and all these things. And social movement spaces back then were so anti-spiritual. We didn't even sing songs together, never mind pray or meditate or sit in silence or any of those things, right? And over the last 10 to 15 years, I've seen this huge resurgence. I think it started with song culture, like you were just talking about with the folks singing songs in Minneapolis. That kind of culture has bloomed in movement spaces. And it's no longer taboo to talk about spirit or to sing songs or to remind us that we belong to each other. I think the contribution of the healing justice movement, the contribution from the leaders of Standing Rock and the leaders from the movement for Black Lives, reminding us that these struggles that we are a part of is so much bigger than political, right? These are at opportunities and our attempts to try to heal traumatic wounds that we have lived with for hundreds of years. And that kind of work is spiritual work, right? And I use that word spiritual very broadly speaking. It doesn't have to be some sort of religious dogma or anything like that. But yeah, I've been so inspired to see the kind of intersection of spiritual work and healing work and resistance work come together more and more over the last 10, 15 years.
I was actually really heartened to see how many people showed up for your talk, because as someone who does activist work in my community, I often take the stance that, everybody's human. Someone who didn't vote the way we wanted before could possibly change and vote a new way if we, talk to them with the idea that they actually are human and could change their minds,
That's right.
If we touch something in their hearts. Going to more of the psychological part of all this, I love this section on page 100 of your book. Let's summarize. So you're talking about trauma. And I laugh because it's like everybody's so traumatized. The protesters in the streets are traumatized. The police are traumatized. The counter-protesters are traumatized. The folks sitting at home, watching this all play out on the news are traumatized. The left is traumatized. The right is traumatized. Apolitical people are traumatized. Marginalized people are traumatized. And in that context, we experienced a global pandemic. And all of that is happening within the context of the escalating climate crisis. This is an era of social, political, and ecological collapse. It's so heavy and negative, but it's also, as I was reading it, it struck me like, well, who's traumatizing us? We're all traumatizing each other, apparently, because we're all so traumatized. Like, where is this coming from? There must be a universal root.
Yeah. I think if you talk to a lot of child psychologists, they'll tell you that the first form of trauma that most of us experience as human beings is early in our infancy, when there's a developmental phase when babies realize that they are separate from their mother. Like, initially, they don't even realize that them and the person that gave birth to them are separate people. And then it hits them that, I am actually separate from this person. And that is the first traumatic experience that all humans at some point experience. And so there's a way in which life is traumatizing. Right, but one of the things that I was talking to the folks in Palestine about today is there's a way in which we can live with a framework that allows us to be grateful for these traumatic experiences, because it's the traumatic experiences that gives us the opportunity to heal. Right? Like, if we weren't hurt to begin with, then we don't have the opportunity to heal. And if we don't go through difficult, challenging, uncomfortable, tension-filled opportunities for healing, then we can't grow, right? Like, liberation doesn't come without the grappling with this thing called healing, this human experience called healing. And so I think there's a way in which the bigger the trauma, the bigger the opportunity we have to heal. And in such a traumatic world that we live in, with all of those issues that you just named, that I've been naming, we have an incredible opportunity to do really, really deep healing work as a species right now, which is why I think it's so important to have that kind of trauma healing lens as we think about social change work.
Yeah, and here's another passage from your book about just being in a moment of operating from trauma. When I'm in panic and operating from trauma, I'm not capable of slowing myself down, regulating myself, holding myself accountable for harms I may have committed, and moving toward healing and transformation. If at that moment you try to, quote, shut me down, I'll probably shut down and get defensive. To me, the work of nonviolent action is about asking society to look at and open up to conversations about a deeper truth than we may feel ready for. We're talking to Kazu Haga, author of Fierce Vulnerability, Healing from Trauma, Emerging Through Collapse, a Buddhist activist, student of nonviolence. Please call in if you'd like to talk to Kazu Haga and have a question or a brief comment at 831-900-5773. That's 831-900-5773. And I guess the other piece of this, and I've heard you talk a few times, and I think I've brought this up in comments or on a webinar with you through Science and Non-Duality, what you're speaking to also, besides all the trauma, and I think you've said this too, I start to get wary of the word trauma because it's become so ubiquitous, and it's like, okay, is everything a trauma, or is everything, sometimes the word starts to lose its meaning, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But what you're also speaking to is that we have the capacity to heal. You're speaking to that we have the capacity to connect with each other, to touch one another, in heart to heart, and to have insights. So I wonder if I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, but it seems like that's the flip side of the trauma piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, on the point of I think people call it concept creep or word creep or something, like broadening the definition of something so much that it loses its meaning. I think we do that a lot in our culture. It happens a lot with trauma. It also has happened with the word harm. The work of Sarah Schulman is really great. She says that there's a difference between conflict, harm, and abuse, and we conflate everything from a microaggression to a genocide into the word harm, and it loses all meaning. And I think we do that to trauma too, right? Not everything that is uncomfortable is traumatic. And so I really do think it's important for people who are working on social change to learn and have a little bit of an understanding of what trauma actually is, and some basic understanding of neuroscience and how trauma impacts our brains and our nervous system and things like that. But we talk a lot about intergenerational trauma, and in this way, we've all have embodied trauma in our bodies, even if it's not ours, right? But if we have intergenerational trauma, if trauma can be passed down from generation to generation, then wisdom can too, right? Like, it's not just trauma that we've inherited from our ancestors. We've also inherited so much wisdom that we may not be aware of intellectually, but if we listen to our bodies, if we listen to our intuition, all of the medicine that we need to heal from that trauma is also there. And I think that is the amazing thing about our species. One of the greatest privileges that I have in my life is that I get to work regularly with incarcerated people throughout California. And these are, some of the people who have been through the most violent lives you can possibly imagine. And they are also people who have come out of the other side of that as some of the most compassionate, dedicated peacemakers I've ever met in my life. And that shows me how resilient we are. And I think part of the commitment to nonviolence is to remember what we are capable of as a species, and to remember that every single person is capable of a level of healing and resilience and transformation that is sometimes hard for us to imagine.
We're talking with Kazu Haga, author of Fierce Vulnerability, Healing from Trauma, Emerging Through Collapse. And we actually, I think, have a caller on the line. So, caller, are you there? And do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I am, Amy. This is Bacha. Good to hear what's going on your show. Thank you for having Kazu there. Kazu, I loved listening to you when you came here. I have a question about your ideas of how, maybe you're going to get into this, but how does one prepare oneself for the possibility of violence? Because I think we're all facing that. What is your best practices? I know that we can't get there 100%, but what is your best practices that you'd like to offer? Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for that really, really important question. You know, I'm in a lot of our trainings, we show videos of nonviolence trainings that happened during the civil rights movement, where students were preparing to go into the lunch counter sit-ins, and they would sit in preparation, and they would sit in these chairs and counters in their school buildings and whatever, and other protesters would play the role of counter protesters, and they would literally ash cigarettes on them and throw coffee in their face and push them around, and they would do these really, really intensive role plays. And as I mentioned, I show videos of those role plays, right? Like role plays at that level no longer really happen, at least in the context of the United States. And instead, we do a lot of much more like de-escalated role plays. And I wonder if it's now time for us to really start thinking about what is it going to take to create safe containers where we can really practice those kinds of escalated role plays so that we can prepare ourselves. Because if we're not prepared for violence and then we face violence, we're going to go into panic. And then the part of our brain that is capable of practicing nonviolence is not accessible to us anymore, right? So I think role plays is one of the most important things that we can do. Our own internal healing work, which is, again, long-term, a lifetime of work, has everything to do with how grounded we are able to stay in the midst of conflict. If we have a lot of unhealed trauma, unintegrated pain in our lives, it's much easier for us to go into a state of panic. And so our own internal healing, this is, I oftentimes say, I had to say this over and over and over again in my book. My book is not about self-help. Right? It's not a self-help book. There is no such thing as individual healing in an interdependent world. And so the healing that we do for ourselves is not so we can feel better about ourselves. It is so that we can model a more grounded nervous system as we move into spaces where we can try to offer more healing to wider and wider circles of people, right? It's so that we can stay more grounded as we engage in social change work. So I think our own healing work has a lot to do with that, and just doing this work in community. Right? It's a lot easier to go into panic if you're at a protest alone versus if you're at a protest with 3, 4, 5 other people.
Yeah, and so important now, even on the day-to-day, to be in connection with community and to reach out. If you haven't out there, to reach out, because it is too hard to be alone and isolated right now, and just reading the news. And so you need to start to build those networks now. And I've been thinking of the Center for Spiritual Living, Inner Light Ministries, or, a dozen other places you can go, on a weekend. Bhatta, thank you so much. That was an excellent question. And I think, okay, Bhatta is off the line now. If you want to call in, we have a little bit of time left at 831-900-5773. I mean, I think people are so excited about you, Kazu Haga, because everyone's looking for a leader now. Everyone's like, we're all thinking the same things, and so it's like, oh, there's Kazu, and how does that... And then the part of me is like, are we going to get a leader like we had a Martin Luther King Jr., or is it going to be more like all of us, Do you have any... Yeah, you think so?
I'm aware of my, whatever public profile I have and the power and the privilege and the social capital that comes with that. And I really try to be intentional about it, and I try to wield that power as skillfully as I can. But I'm also... I do a lot of my own shadow work, and I'm so aware of how broken I am and all of the skills that I don't have. So I wonder if I could put in a quick plug right now for a program that we just launched that will start at the end of March.
Yeah.
It's a 3-month program called the Fierce Vulnerability Kinship Lab. And I'm partnering with actually a woman, Michelle, who's based in the Santa Cruz area. And it's a 3-month virtual program with speakers like Francis Weller and Ma Muse and Kyra Duolingo. And it's partially a book club of my book, Fierce Vulnerability. But also, every participant will be put into small local pods of between 3 to 7 people who can hopefully meet in person, so that this pod can become kind of your movement home as you learn to experiment with fierce vulnerability. And it's part of onboarding into this thing that people have been trying to build for years now called the Fierce Vulnerability Network. And part of my hope is that, I can put on this training and have a lot of people joining the Fierce Vulnerability Network so that other leaders can emerge, so that as skillfully as possible, I can just become one of the people who are lost and confused and trying to figure out how to respond to the polycrisis. And so if, any of what we're talking about resonates with you, I really want to encourage people to check out the Convene Kinship Lab. It's on my website, as well as convene.community. And yeah, hopefully you can be one of the leaders that we so desperately need.
And that's also, just to remind everyone, the website is www.kazu, Kazu, Haga, Haga.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that's where you can find more about Kazu Haga, who we're talking to right now. And we might be able to fit in one more question if you want to call in. There's so much that we could talk about. We could probably fill another hour, is how I see it anyway, because this is my jam, this whole conversation. And, because I do come from helping people spiritually find peace, and that has been like in communities that have had a lot of problems, a lot of crime, and so I kind of know what that's like to work in a collective toward what we used to call, or what I still call, innate mental health. Okay, innate wisdom, right? Innate resiliency. But a lot of the work in my community is called Three Principles community, has been very individual. Like you were just talking about, that's what I'm relating to now. If enlightenment is an individualistic thing. It's you get enlightened, and then there's a spiritual idea. Somehow you being enlightened is going to help the whole world. And I kind of believe that's true, that seems like, wow, if you get enlightened, or if you are just a more grounded person, you help the world naturally, I think, via your energy, right? But you're saying this other thing, which I think is also true, which is we are also interconnected. And, the Buddha, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Buddha said, well, I'm not going to leave until everybody is saved. I don't know actually what that looked like because he passed away. But do you know what I mean? Like, I do feel like sometimes it's important to go and reflect and be on your own and sort of study spirituality. Like for me, that's helpful, solitude. But then I also look at the world and I think it seems very selfish to do that all the time and just have a good life or whatever, Yeah.
And again, I think that's that non-dual truth. It's the 200% truth, right? Like I'm an introvert. I need a lot of alone time. I also work one-on-one with a therapist as part of my healing journey. Those things do matter. But I think the delusion lies in thinking that if I just keep on working on myself, that will be enough. But what if I continue to work on myself and I'm able to heal all of my traumas and I become this enlightened human being, and then I step outside of my house, and then the person that lives next door to me has not been able to have those opportunities to heal, and their physical needs aren't getting met, and they decide to rob me. Like, how free am I, right? And years ago, I heard a leader from the Movement for Black Lives say that we are asked to heal collective wounds individually. And like so much of our pain, so much of our trauma are the result of systemic injustice. And if our pain, our trauma is collective and it is relational and it is systemic, then the healing also needs to be relational and collective and systemic. And so I think it's both necessary and both true that we need individual healing and collective healing. And if we see those two things as even separate things, I think we're missing the point, right? Like collective healing and individual healing, when viewed with the right context, I think is the same thing, just happening in different places at different scales.
I want to read, just as we're getting to the top of the hour, and we're going to have to end very soon, but you talk about creative emergence, and towards the end of your book, you talk more about like, what does it look like to not know What does it look like to not have a clear plan? I think, and you should see all the dog ears on this book. Anyway, it says here, creative emergence loves ambiguity, even ambivalence. It's the ability to embrace the situation and not have a clear idea of how to move forward. One clear idea is not good enough. You need millions and millions of ideas. Try them out and see which one finally takes off. Part of why we're in this mess is because humanity stopped listening to emergence. We've spent the last several millennia largely going against the flow, too long letting our intellect lead and trying to control things beyond our understanding. The path forward is about letting go of our attachment to understanding and control, accepting that we're lost, confused, and we don't know what lies ahead, but continuing to move anyway, walking slowly enough to hear the subtle voice of the Tao, or the Tao. Do you want to, as a final, you have about a minute or so to comment if you would like.
Yeah, as an activist, I've been trained my entire life that in order to make change, I need to have a concrete demand and an airtight strategy with all the contingencies in place to figure out how to get from here to there. And I think part of what Fierce Vulnerability is inviting us to do is to acknowledge that the changes that are happening on our planet right now, not just even this nation state, but us as a species, are at such a scale that it is beyond our intellect's capacity to understand. And it is the worldview that says if we think long and hard enough, we can control all of our outcomes that got us into this mess. So I think there's a lot of beauty and wisdom in just saying we are scared, we don't know what to do, we don't know how to get through this moment, and we're going to continue to try to affirm life and create beauty every moment of the way. And we have faith that we will be able to get to where we need to go.
I love that. We can always be in beauty. We can always be in love. Love is always here. Thank you, Kazu Haga, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. You can find Kazu Haga's programs at kazuhaga.com. Kazu is the author of the book Fierce Vulnerability: Healing from Trauma, Emerging Through Collapse. If you appreciated this program, join us every first and third Monday at 6 p.m. for our live broadcast, and then pick up our edited podcasts at Apple, Spotify, and at YouTube under the KSQD YouTube channel. And find the podcast as Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills at all the other sites. You will find this show posted there in about 1 week. Find us also on Facebook and Instagram at Amy Chen Mills, and also Moment of Truth Collective. It really, really helps to boost our program if you like, rate, and share our show at your favorite site and write a review. Visit our Substack, Moment of Truth Dispatch, for more on everything we talk about here. Plus, thanks to our entire team, Nyanko Nyasu, Mei-Ling Obinata, and Todd Zimmerman. Theme song by Zimmerman of Nativeverse Studios, logo by Kathy Krizik. And thanks to the whole KSQD team on the California Central Coast. Shoot us an email at amy, A-M-I, at ksqd.org with questions or comments. And remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy.